Welcome to Revenge Echoes, where stories speak louder than revenge. What you're about to hear might sound like fiction, but for someone out there, it's the truth they never got to tell. My name is Heidi Lewis. I'm 36 years old, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I used to believe in comfort, in security, in the quiet promise that a stable marriage could survive anything. Until one Friday afternoon at the South Park Mall, when a friend's glance shattered the illusion I'd been clinging to for far too long. I was shopping for a birthday gift for my niece, just something simple, a charm bracelet, maybe a new sketch pad, and had paused outside a little boutique when I heard someone call my name. Heidi? It was Harper. An old friend from college, someone I hadn't seen in years. We hugged briefly, and the smile on her face faltered almost instantly. I saw the change in her eyes before she even spoke. She looked concerned, no, disturbed. "Are you okay?" she asked, gently. And before I could answer, she lowered her voice. "I'm sorry if this is crossing a line, but I just saw Ethan. He was at Savoy Prime." My heart skipped. That couldn't be right. "He's out of town," I replied, the words sticking to my throat. "On business." She looked at me with something almost like pity. "He was making a reservation. For two." I saw his name on the screen. Ethan Lewis. 8 p.m. window seat. He wasn't alone. I don't remember what I said next. I must have smiled. Or pretended to. I walked away before my knees gave out. The rest of the mall blurred. The noise, the laughter, the music, none of it reached me. It was like standing in the eye of a storm and watching my life spin in slow motion around me. I got into my car, and my hands trembled as I dialed the number for Savoy Prime. "Good evening," the hostess chirped. "How may I help you?" "I'd like to confirm a reservation," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Under Ethan Lewis. For tonight." There was a pause. "Yes, ma'am. Table for two. 8 p.m. window seat." I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart. Because something deeper settled in me that moment, something cold and clear. Betrayal doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives like a whisper. And now I could hear it. Loud and unmistakable. I went home. Opened the closet. Chose a black silk dress I hadn't touched in 2 years, a birthday gift to myself, back when I still believed in making time for me. I did my hair slowly, deliberately. Put on deep red lipstick. Not for seduction. Not for him. But for me. Because no matter what happened that night, I refused to let it break me. At 7:30 p.m., I parked across the street from the restaurant. Savoy Prime shimmered with amber lights behind tall glass panes. I walked in, smiled at the host, and asked for a seat with a full view of the dining area. They placed me near a column, half hidden, half watching. The waiter brought me a glass of water. At 8:02 p.m., they arrived. Ethan looked polished. Confident. The same tie he wore on our anniversary dinner last year. He smiled as he pulled out the chair for her, blonde, younger, wearing a deep green silk dress that clung to her waist like envy. They sat, laughed, toasted with red wine. Her hand brushed his. I didn't cry. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded note I had written just moments before leaving home. Just 15 words. I waved over a waiter, nodded toward Ethan's table. "I'd like to send a note to the man in the gray shirt. Table 6. Just to him. And I'd like to watch him read it." The waiter nodded, discreet and quick. I placed the folded slip in his hand. Inside, it read, "Enjoy your dinner. I hope the food isn't as bland as the lie you told me this morning." I watched from across the room. The waiter slipped the note beside Ethan's wine glass and whispered something. Ethan glanced down, frowning. He picked up the note, opened it, read, It took 3 seconds. 3 seconds for his smile to vanish. For the lie to shatter. The wine glass dropped from his hand, spilling deep red across the table and onto her dress. The woman, his mistress, jerked back. "Ethan? What's going on?" He didn't answer. He scanned the room, wild-eyed, hunted. Then he saw me. I raised my glass slightly in a silent toast. Then stood. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. I turned and walked out, heels echoing beneath the golden light. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, brushing my skin like a whisper of rebirth. I didn't go home. I drove. Past familiar streets and neighborhoods and memories. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. Another buzz. Another message. More desperate than the last. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it was nearly 11 p.m. He was there. On the couch. Slumped. Pale. I opened the door. Quietly. Gently. Like I was entering a crime scene where I already knew the victim's name. "I'm listening," I said, placing my purse down. He stood. Hesitant. Shaking. "Heidi. I never meant for it to go this far." I crossed my arms. "Great. Then tell me how far it didn't go." He confessed. 6 months. Her name was Clara. She worked with him. It started as late meetings, hotel lounges, project brainstorms. Grew into something darker. I asked questions. Coldly. Directly. He tried to blame me. "You were always busy. With work. With teaching." I felt alone. I laughed, sharp, bitter. "You mean while I planned our anniversary trip? While I helped your mother transition into her new home? While I made dinner and reminded you to take your meds every night? That kind of busy?" He sank into the couch. She made me feel seen. I leaned forward. "Then let me ask you this. Do you love her?" Silence. "I don't know." I stood. That's enough of an answer. Then I walked up the stairs. Calm. Straight-backed. From that moment on, the guest room was his. And I started preparing for something far greater than divorce. I started preparing for war. I didn't fall apart. That's the thing most people expect when betrayal slams into your life like a wrecking ball, you crumble. But I didn't. Not on the outside. On the inside, something had already shifted that night at Savoy Prime. Watching the man I married toast another woman while feeding her lies under dimmed chandelier light, that was the moment I stopped mourning a marriage and started building my exit. Ethan thought silence meant forgiveness. That if I wasn't screaming, it meant I'd stay. He hadn't realized that silence was my strategy. The next morning, I woke up early. He was still asleep in the guest room. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and opened my laptop. Step 1: secure my finances. Our joint account had become suspiciously active over the last few months. I reviewed each transaction with surgical precision: dinners for two at upscale restaurants I'd never been to, weekend charges at hotels in Asheville, luxury spa visits, wine club memberships. All aligned with weekends he claimed to be at conferences. By noon, I had flagged enough to calculate how much of our shared money had quietly been funneled into his double life. $187,000. I dressed sharp. Clean lines. Confident face. No smudged mascara, no shaky hands. At the bank, I met with a representative I trusted, one who had helped us with our mortgage refinancing years ago. "I'd like to open a new account," I said. "In my name only. And I'd like to transfer my legally fair share from our joint account into it." He blinked once, then nodded. "We'll need documentation." I handed over printed statements, tax filings, and a spreadsheet of every traceable deposit I had contributed. We spent over an hour breaking down the numbers. No emotion. Just facts. When it was done, the funds were moved. My own account. My own name. My own safety net. Next, legal leverage. I needed more than emotions, I needed ammunition. Ethan's home office had always been his fortress. He locked it like it held secrets from Wall Street itself. But I knew something he forgot. He hadn't changed his password in years. It was his mother's name, spelled backward. I waited until he went on one of his long evening walks. The moment the door clicked shut, I slipped inside and sat at his desk. The password worked. There it was, everything. One folder stood out immediately, Skyfall Strategy. Click. Inside were documents about a pending acquisition of a fintech firm named Halden Core. I didn't know much about the company, but I knew this, Clara worked there. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Until I opened the email chain. Cash PS, her initials. Her nickname, Ethan once told me. She had sent him confidential reports. Cash flow projections. Internal staff memos. Timelines for expansion. All labeled internal only. He had used insider information from his affair partner to steer investment strategy. This wasn't just cheating anymore. This was a crime. I backed up everything. Copied files to a flash drive, uploaded to the cloud under a new encrypted email. Then I printed out the most damning evidence. I stared at it. The black and white proof of his betrayal, not just of me, but of the law. I wasn't just a wife scorned anymore. I was a witness. I needed advice, quietly, discreetly. And there was one person I trusted more than anyone. My older brother, Ryan. He worked at the SEC office in Raleigh. I called him after dinner. I need to ask a few hypothetical questions, I said. He chuckled. Another Reaganized hypothetical, huh? I ignored the joke and went straight in. Say person A receives confidential internal financial data from someone working at Company B. This person then uses that information to make decisions that impact investments at their own firm. No disclosures. Personal email transfers. Would that be a violation? There was a pause. If that's true, he said slowly, that's insider trading. They could be looking at civil penalties. Even criminal prosecution. I thanked him. Hung up. And stared out at the dark city. Ethan didn't just cheat on me. He built a criminal strategy off that affair. Used a woman's loyalty to commit securities fraud. And now, I was holding the match. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I hired a financial advisor, someone Ryan had once recommended. She combed through everything, helped me set up safeguards, flagged exposure linked to Ethan, and created a firewall around my personal assets. Don't let emotions stall you, she said. You're not just protecting yourself now. You're reclaiming your future. 3 days later, I arranged a meeting with someone I never thought I'd face. Clara. I didn't call. I didn't text. I sent a single email from a new account. Downtown Durham. Lou Noir Coffee. Thursday. Noon. Come alone. She showed up 15 minutes late. Expensive bag. Flawless makeup. But her eyes flickered with uncertainty the moment she saw me. Heidi, she said. I didn't smile. Sit. This won't take long. She did. I didn't know, she said quickly. Ethan told me you were separated. That your marriage was over. I said nothing. I opened my phone and slid it across the table. Photo after photo, our 10th anniversary in Charleston. Christmas with his family. A love note he sent just 3 weeks ago. Her face drained of color. He lied to both of us, I said. But this, I pulled out a printed email. This is bigger than infidelity. She read the page. Her hand shook. I didn't know, she whispered. He said it was just industry research. I locked eyes with her. You're complicit. Whether you knew or not. You could go to prison for this. She stared down, quiet. I'm giving you one chance, I said. Cooperate. Or get burned. She didn't speak. But I saw it. The fear. The understanding. The walls crumbling around her own illusions. I walked out of that cafe with more than I came in with. Not vengeance. Not closure. Leverage. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because I was ready. It's a strange thing, to live inside the eye of a storm you created. There's silence, but it's not peace. It's focus. Precision. And I knew that the next move had to be perfect. Friday morning, 8:45 a.m., I stood in front of the towering glass lobby of Northbridge Capital. This place used to represent everything Ethan prided himself on: prestige, power, reputation. It was his cathedral of ambition. But today, it would be his reckoning. He had no idea I was coming. The night before, I had sent a carefully worded email to Michael Grant, the chairman of the board. Attached were selected documents, labeled and indexed, clearly showing not only the insider communication between Ethan and Clara but also the financial trail that tied it all together. I kept my tone direct, factual, professional. As a concerned indirect shareholder and ethics consultant, I am requesting a brief moment to present critical information at tomorrow's board review session regarding the Halden Core acquisition. I believe the evidence I've attached raises serious compliance concerns. They responded in less than 3 hours. You will have 15 minutes. Meeting room 2, 5th floor. Be prompt. I was. The receptionist greeted me with a faint but respectful smile, having seen my name pre-cleared on the guest list. Good morning, Ms. Lewis. You'll be escorted now. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored panel: charcoal gray blazer, high collar, clean bun, steady eyes. I didn't look like a betrayed wife. I looked like someone who had come to collect truth. When the conference room doors opened, the board was already seated around a long oval table. Ethan stood at the front, mid-sentence, confidently presenting the projected merger with Halden Core. His voice faltered when he saw me. Reagan, he choked out, stunned. I gave no reaction. Mr. Grant stood and gestured to the podium. We've agreed to let Ms. Lewis speak, he said clearly. Please give her your attention. I connected my laptop to the projector and faced the room. My name is Heidi Lewis, I began. As an indirect shareholder through the Turner Equity Fund and as someone in possession of verifiable internal correspondence related to this merger, I feel ethically compelled to present a risk profile not yet considered. Slide 1. Email excerpts. Subject lines: confidential, do not share. Attachments showing internal Halden Core documents. IP traces. A ripple of murmurs spread across the table. Ethan stepped forward. This is absurd. That's fake. It's. I held up a hand. You'll have time to respond after. Slide 2. Hotel invoices. Spa receipts. Private charges billed to Northbridge corporate cards. Dates matched to Clara's supposed personal time. Slide 3. An audio recording. Ethan's voice. Calm, smooth, unmistakable. Clara, I need the projections before Thursday. Even if it's early. I trust you. What if it's flagged internally? It won't be. Just send it from your Gmail. No one tracks that stuff. Silence. Thick as concrete. I closed the laptop. I've submitted this evidence to the SEC this morning at 8:10 a.m. My brother, Ryan Ellis, is a senior compliance officer there. All communications have been documented and time-stamped. Ethan looked like he had swallowed glass. Mr. Grant turned to him. Do you have a response? Ethan's voice cracked. I didn't know she was recording. I didn't mean for. You didn't think you'd get caught, I said, level and calm. That's the difference. The CFO leaned forward. I propose we suspend all Halden core activities until this is properly investigated. Seconded, another board member echoed. We'll also initiate an internal review and suspend Mr. Lewis from all strategy-related decision-making effective immediately, Mr. Grant said. Ethan looked at me. Fury. Fear. And the burning disbelief that his empire had just caved in, not with a scandalous outburst, but with documents and truth. How long have you been planning this? He spat. What more do you want? I met his eyes, steady. I don't want anything. I just won't let you bury me, or this company, in your lies. And I walked out. I didn't look back. 3 days later, Northbridge issued an internal memo. Effective immediately, Mr. Ethan Lewis will step down from his strategic role pending a full compliance investigation. Diplomatic. Polished. But the message was clear. The king had fallen. I received calls and emails from colleagues and acquaintances. Some were concerned. Some were curious. But none of them heard from me directly. I wasn't interested in reliving the drama. I wasn't here to gossip. I was here to build something new. Later that week, I filed for divorce. I made no demands beyond what was fair, my personal investments, my new apartment in South End Charlotte, and the removal of Ethan's name from anything we once shared. He didn't argue. He signed everything. Maybe he thought I still had more dirt. Maybe he finally understood, I was no longer the quiet, forgiving woman who let things slide for the sake of harmony. I moved into my new apartment 2 weeks later. 6th floor. Balcony facing the park. Small, but mine. No shared spaces. No shared lies. I brought out an old easel I hadn't touched in years. Placed it by the window. Sat in front of it with a jar of cobalt blue. And for the first time in nearly a decade, I painted. Not for him. Not to escape. But for me. And the silence was no longer empty. It was peace. I wish I could say everything got better overnight. That once Ethan was out of my life and I had my own apartment, the healing came easy, like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocation. But healing doesn't come in breaths. It comes in moments. Quiet, unremarkable, ordinary moments where you don't think about them. When you pour your coffee and realize it's the first morning you haven't checked your phone for their name. When you fall asleep without wondering who they're texting. When the silence in the room doesn't feel like loneliness anymore, it feels like space. I started taking on more consulting work. My background in ethics and compliance, once something I thought I'd left behind when I became Ethan's support system, turned out to be the very thing that would carry me forward. My name had made its way around quietly through financial circles in Charlotte. People respected how I had handled the Northbridge situation, calm, professional, discreet. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan had always told me I was too reserved, that I held back too much. But my silence didn't mean weakness. It meant strategy. And now it was my advantage. Still, the strangest moment of all came on a sunny afternoon, weeks after I moved. I had just submitted a final ethics audit report for a fintech startup when I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. The voice was soft. Familiar. Heidi, it's Clara. I said nothing. Just waited. I'm not calling to apologize, she said quickly. I just wanted to let you know. I've submitted a full personal disclosure to the SEC. I've agreed to cooperate completely. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I've also resigned, she continued. I don't want to stay in an industry I helped compromise. I need to rebuild. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know. There was silence between us. But it wasn't heavy. It was mutual recognition. We weren't friends. We'd never be friends. But we were two women who had been manipulated by the same man, caught in a story neither of us thought we'd be a part of. She chose to walk away from it, finally. And I chose to write my own ending. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said. Click. That was it. I never heard her voice again. But every so often, I'd get anonymous updates through a secure email. Small messages. Sometimes a line. They've asked for more documents. Final interview with the SEC this week. Thank you for helping me see it sooner. And somehow, that meant more than I expected it to. A few months later, I received an official confirmation from Northbridge's HR department. My indirect fund investment, one I'd made years ago when Ethan insisted I didn't need to worry about money stuff, had grown into a 2.6% stake. The board had reviewed the investment and formally acknowledged my shareholder status. Thank you for your transparency and cooperation during this transition period, the email read. I reread that line twice. Not because I was shocked. But because for the first time, someone had thanked me for doing what was right, even when it cost me everything. That night, I poured a glass of wine, stepped out onto my balcony, and just breathed. It wasn't joy. It wasn't pride. It was calm. The kind of calm you earn. I hadn't thought about Ethan in weeks. But then, as if summoned by some cruel twist of fate, he appeared digitally. A message popped up from a new number. Can we talk? I didn't respond. Then another. Please. Just one conversation. Then a longer one. You were right. About everything. I lost my job. My license is under review. The SEC says I could be indicted. You always had more strength than me. I see that now. I don't know who I am anymore. I stared at the message. Not with hatred. Not even sadness. Just detachment. I deleted it. Ethan was no longer part of the story. He was a footnote. And I had chapters to write. The next morning, I woke up early. Painted for an hour before breakfast. Took a walk through Freedom Park. Sat at the lake and watched ducks skim across the water with such effortless grace, it almost made me laugh. I was alone. But not empty. There's something sacred about that kind of solitude. Not the kind that comes from being abandoned, but the kind you choose. When you've been broken open and rebuilt yourself, stronger, wiser, quieter. People think revenge is rage. Screaming. Smashing glass. Exposing dirty secrets. But real revenge? It's dignity. It's walking into a boardroom and dismantling a man's career with facts instead of fury. It's painting at sunrise, knowing the man who betrayed you wakes up to silence and regret. It's looking at your bank statement and seeing your name, and only your name, on the account. It's starting over on your terms. It was a Wednesday when the letter arrived. I had just returned from a client lunch in Uptown and found it tucked neatly in my mailbox, a plain white envelope with my name written in Ethan's handwriting. My first instinct was to toss it into the trash. But something about the weight of it made me pause. Back inside, I placed it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for several minutes, sipping from the glass of iced tea I'd made before leaving that morning. Finally, curiosity won. Inside was a single piece of paper. Folded once. No dramatic please. No flowery apologies. Just a letter. Heidi. I've rewritten this a dozen times. Probably more. And maybe this won't matter. Maybe it's just me trying to make sense of the wreckage I caused. But I needed to say this. You were the best thing I had. Not just in the way people say that when they lose something, but in the way that shakes you when you realize it too late. I betrayed you. Not just by being with Clara, but in all the little ways, long before her. When I stopped listening. When I started lying. When I let resentment replace honesty. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know, seeing you in that boardroom, calm and unshakable, was the moment I realized who you really were. Not the woman I thought would crumble, but the woman I should have admired more. I'm sorry. I'll never stop being sorry. Ethan. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. No tears came. Not because I was numb, but because I had already bled all the emotion I'd ever give him. The man who once held my hand through our first mortgage now sat under investigation for felony-level misconduct. And the woman who once believed in him had become his reckoning. That night, I wrote a letter of my own. But not to send. To release. Dear Ethan. It's been months since that night at Savoy Prime. 15 words changed everything. Not because they exposed your affair, but because they marked the moment I stopped believing in us. Betrayal doesn't start with a lie. It starts with silence. When you stopped looking at me during dinner. When my voice stopped mattering. When my presence became your background noise. You thought I would stay. I didn't. You thought I would scream. I didn't. You thought I would forgive. I won't. But I don't hate you. That would still give you space in my heart. No, Ethan, I've simply let go. You see, I found something better than justice. I found peace. Heidi. I never mailed it. Just folded it carefully and placed it in the bottom drawer of my new desk. It sat beside the original note I had passed to the waiter at Savoy Prime. Enjoy your dinner. I hope the food isn't as bland as the lie you told me this morning. Sometimes the simplest truths are the sharpest. A week later, Ryan called me. They've started building the formal case, he said. Clara's cooperating. The SEC's moving fast. Will he be charged? I asked. Too early to tell. But they're not just investigating, Ethan's name is officially on the radar. His financial licenses are already suspended pending review. I didn't say anything for a moment. You okay? Ryan asked. I smiled softly. I am. And I was. Because none of it was about punishing Ethan anymore. That phase had passed. What mattered now was clarity. Accountability. Truth. My story wasn't one of vengeance. It was of reclamation. 6 months after I left our house for good, I hosted a small dinner at my new apartment. Just 5 people. My brother, his wife, my best friend from grad school, and 2 clients turned friends who'd watched my rebirth quietly and supported me every step of the way. We ate homemade pasta. Drank wine from a vineyard I'd always wanted to visit but never did because Ethan wasn't into reds. We laughed. Really laughed. After dessert, I stepped onto my balcony alone, the sound of conversation humming behind me. The city lights sparkled like confetti thrown by the universe itself. It wasn't about winning. It was about choosing myself, finally. Letting go of a marriage built on illusion, and embracing the life I had rebuilt with my own hands. I used to think strength was holding it all together. Now I know real strength is letting go of what holds you back. The morning I signed the final divorce papers, it rained. Not the violent kind that rattles windows or soaks you to the bone. Just a steady, persistent drizzle that felt more like a cleansing than a storm. I remember looking out the courthouse window, watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass, and thinking, this is it. This is where it ends, and where I begin. Ethan didn't show up. His lawyer came alone, carrying a briefcase and a defeated expression. I had asked for nothing beyond what I had personally contributed, my investment shares, my apartment, and complete control over my own assets. No alimony. No revenge clauses. Just freedom. The lawyer slid the papers toward me. He signed everything. No objections. Of course he didn't. What was there to fight for? The man who once argued with me over salad dressing now couldn't even look me in the eye across a legal table. Because he knew I had all the leverage. Legally, ethically, emotionally. I hadn't just walked away. I'd outgrown him. When I returned home that afternoon, the silence in my apartment greeted me like an old friend. I changed into soft clothes, pulled my hair into a bun, and curled up with my laptop and a mug of mint tea. A new email was waiting. From an unknown address. No subject line. I clicked it instinctively, and a single line appeared. You helped me find the courage to resign. Thank you. CP. Clara. Still anonymous. Still distant. But honest. I thought of her sometimes, not with anger, not even with pity, but with strange empathy. We had been mirrors for each other. Both seduced by different lies. Both used for convenience. Both trying to make sense of the damage left behind. But unlike Ethan, she was trying to make things right. A few days later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Ryan. They're moving forward, he said without even saying hello. SEC's building its formal case. They've collected enough digital evidence. And Ethan's on their radar for possible criminal charges. Will they indict? Probably not right away. They'll push for a civil settlement first. But he's not working in finance again anytime soon. That's already decided. I didn't smile. Didn't sigh. I just nodded. Thanks, Ryan. You sure you're okay? He asked. I paused, then looked around my apartment, the canvas by the window, the stack of finished consulting reports, the potted plant I'd managed to keep alive longer than any houseplant before. I'm better than okay, I said. I'm finally me. That weekend, I drove to Asheville. It had once been the place I planned to take Ethan for our anniversary. He had canceled that trip at the last minute, claiming urgent business. I now knew that business was Clara in a red dress and a hotel suite 2 hours west. But I went anyway. Not for closure. For celebration. I checked into a quiet little lodge tucked into the hills. No 5-star lobby. No valet. Just warmth, pinewood walls, and a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains that made my heart feel a little fuller. The next morning, I woke early, wrapped myself in a blanket, and stepped out onto the balcony with coffee. Fog rolled across the trees below like a living thing, and the silence was absolute. Not the suffocating silence of a cold marriage. The sacred silence of a life reclaimed. I thought about all the moments I had silenced myself in that relationship. The times I swallowed my instincts. The times I told myself he's just tired, or he doesn't mean it like that, or maybe I'm overthinking. But I hadn't been overthinking. I had been under-listening to myself. And that was the greatest betrayal of all. No more. When I returned home to Charlotte, my inbox was flooded with new referrals, startups needing ethics guidance, corporations hoping to audit their compliance before an SEC letter forced their hand. Apparently, word had spread. I'd become the woman who dismantled her husband's fraud without raising her voice. Some people called it ruthless. But those who mattered? They called it integrity. I began turning down contracts that didn't align with my values. Started a blog on corporate transparency, and even received an invitation to speak on a panel about women in finance who exposed misconduct. Funny, isn't it? The life I built while he was busy destroying his. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the same cafe where I'd first confronted Clara months ago. Not intentionally, I was just passing by and needed a place to answer emails. The server greeted me warmly. Back again? I smiled. Yes, but the energy is very different this time. As I sipped my coffee, I opened my journal, a new habit I had picked up. Not a digital document. A real, bound notebook. Ink and paper. Something honest. Undeletable. And I wrote. Today, I realized I'm no longer afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of giving my peace away to the wrong people again. I won't. I've learned. This time, I write my own script. And I always choose the ending. Because if life had taught me anything, it's that some endings aren't endings at all. They're declarations. A line in the sand. A vow to never accept less than what your heart truly deserves. 6 months had passed since that night at Savoy Prime, since I'd watched a man I once loved drop a wine glass because of a 15-word note. Half a year since I walked away from everything I thought I wanted, only to discover what I actually needed was never tied to him at all. I was standing on my balcony one afternoon, early fall winds curling through the open doors, when I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Not numbness. Not hesitation. But real stillness, the kind that says, you made it. The sunlight spilled across my desk, catching on the cobalt streaks of the canvas I'd been working on. It wasn't a portrait, or a scene, or anything definable. Just waves of color, smoky grays, warm ochres, a bold streak of blue down the middle. It was, in some ways, everything I had lived through. I picked up a fresh sheet of ivory paper. Not for a report. Not for the SEC. Just a letter. A private one. Dear Ethan. It's strange. I don't think of you with anger anymore. That part of me is gone. This letter isn't for you. Not really. It's for the version of me who stayed too long. Who believed love meant sacrifice. Who mistook silence for peace. I used to wonder how someone could wake up beside me every morning, say I love you, then lie by nightfall. I used to ache over that question. But now, I understand something I didn't before. Betrayal begins quietly. It begins the moment someone chooses comfort over courage, self-interest over honesty. And maybe that's what hurt most, not the affair. Not the lies. But realizing you were never as brave as I believed. You wanted convenience. I wanted connection. Now we both have what we chose. I'm writing this not because I miss you, but because I don't. And that, Ethan, is the real freedom. I don't need a response. I don't need closure. I have myself. And that is more than enough. Heidi. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where the first note still sat. The note that started it all. The note I had once been afraid to send. Enjoy your dinner. I hope the food isn't as bland as the lie you told me this morning. 15 words. That was all it took to expose everything. And now, I lived by a different 15. I choose peace. I choose truth. I choose me, every single time. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I received a call from a number I recognized immediately, the SEC liaison assigned to Ethan's case. She didn't speak in riddles. Just facts. The investigation has concluded. Ethan Lewis has been formally fined and barred from the financial sector for 3 years. Due to full cooperation and a first-time offense, no jail time will be served, but the ruling is final. Thank you, I said. No need to thank me, she replied. It was your evidence that made this possible. And just like that, the chapter closed, not with a bang, but with a seal. Ethan had officially lost everything he once used to define himself. But me? I hadn't lost anything. I had found everything. In the weeks that followed, I took on fewer clients. I became more selective. Not because I was tired, but because I finally understood the value of my own time. I launched a private consultancy, Lumen Integrity, specializing in internal ethics training, financial compliance reviews, and whistleblower protection strategies. Clients came quietly at first. Then steadily. Then by referral. A year after I walked out of Savoy Prime, I gave a keynote address at a corporate leadership conference. The title? When Silence Speaks Loudest, Why Integrity is a Revolution. I opened with a story, not Ethan's name, not Clara's, just the outline. A woman who was lied to. A man who thought he was untouchable. A truth that changed everything. By the end, the room was still. Several women had tears in their eyes. One executive came up afterward and whispered, "I needed that more than you know." And I realized, my story wasn't just mine. It belonged to every person who's ever been lied to and made to feel like they were the problem. Every woman who stayed silent because she was told she was too much, too emotional, too suspicious. We are not too much. We are enough. We are the fire beneath the mask, the strength they never saw coming. And sometimes, all it takes is a note. Or a step. Or a line in a letter that you write not to send, but to declare who you are now. Whole. Wise. Unapologetically powerful. I stood outside that night and looked up at the sky, clear and wide and full of stars. I had thought my life was over the day I saw Ethan walk into Savoy Prime with another woman. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Of me. Heidi's story is a reminder that betrayal doesn't define us. Our response to it does. She didn't just expose the lies, she rose above them with clarity, strength, and grace. Not every wound needs revenge. Sometimes, the loudest justice is a life lived in freedom, in peace, and without apology. If you've ever been silenced, sidelined, or betrayed, ask yourself, what story will you write next? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes, where we bring you real stories of strength, transformation, and poetic justice.